I've been on ships for 11 years. I'm not sure that's the most important thing about me, but it's the most accurate. My name is Aiden Knight. I'm 35, though I've been told I look older, and I don't argue the point. I have no apartment, no car, no plants to keep alive. I have 2 duffel bags, one for cold weather postings, one for warm, and a bank account I check maybe twice a month when we're in port and I remember to. The last lease I signed on a land-based address expired 7 years ago. I didn't renew it. Couldn't see the point of paying for a place to store furniture I didn't own. This is not a sad story. Or it wasn't, not until Voyage 31. Let me tell you about the life first, because if you don't understand what normal looks like for me, you won't understand what wrong looks like. 6 a.m. is crew mess breakfast. 6:45, I'm on the service deck doing whatever the rotation says. Housekeeping, logistics, loading coordination, whatever needs doing. There's a split at 2 p.m., 4 hours off, and then back on at 6 for the dinner service window. 10 p.m. I'm at the stern with a cigarette if the weather allows it. Midnight bunk. 6 hours, then again. That's it. That's the whole shape of the day. Every day for 6 months at a stretch, and then a month off, and then 6 months again. I've done it so many times that the routine has stopped feeling like routine and started feeling like breathing. You don't think about breathing, you just do it. What I love about it, and I do love it, or I did, is the particular silence of the crew deck at 3 in the morning when the engines drop to holding speed. There's a change in the vibration through the floor, a settling. The whole ship exhales. Passengers never hear it because they're 3 decks up sleeping off the buffet, but down here you feel it in your shins. It's the closest thing I have to a nightly ritual. I've stopped noticing the passengers. That sounds worse than it is. I notice them the way you notice weather. They're there. They matter to the operation. And every 7 days a new set comes aboard and the whole cycle resets. I've stopped noticing the smell too, mostly. Diesel and industrial cleaner below the waterline, a bleach and carpet smell above it, and over everything this faint salt air that gets into your clothes and never quite leaves. I know it's there because I can smell it on myself when I'm on land. On the ship I can't smell anything. The staff mess is 1 deck below the waterline. Low ceiling, fluorescent strip lighting. 4 tables bolted to the floor. There's a coffee machine against the far wall that has been broken on the hot water side for 3 weeks. You get a cold trickle from it now, lukewarm at best, which means I've been drinking more of the instant stuff from a thermos I fill upstairs. The room belongs to crew. Passengers don't come down here. They don't even know it exists, most of them. I've eaten thousands of meals in this room. I know every scratch on every table. I know the one on the near left corner that looks like someone took a key to it. And the burn mark on the far table that was there when I started this contract and will probably be there when I leave. This contract started feeling different in the first week. I couldn't name it then. I still can't name it cleanly. The ship is the same ship, same class I've worked for 8 of my 11 years, same layout, same holds, same engine hum. The route is the same route. The crew roster has a few new faces, but nothing unusual. And yet something sits wrong, like a door that has always swung shut on its own and now requires a shoulder. You can't point to the thing that changed. You just know it isn't closing the way it should. I told myself it was fatigue, end of a long stretch between contracts maybe. I'm not 25 anymore and the split shifts land differently at 35 than they did at 24. That's what I told myself. I was sitting in the staff mess this afternoon, late, the room empty between shifts, and I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a cigarette and had it between my fingers for a full 10 seconds. before I remembered I was below decks. No smoking below the waterline. I've known that rule for 11 years. I've never once forgotten it. I looked at the cigarette like it had appeared there on its own. I set it on the table in front of me. The fluorescent strip overhead was humming at something slightly off. Not flickering, just humming at a frequency that sat just wrong enough to register. The coffee machine dripped its cold trickle into an empty pot. I sat there and thought about the fact that I knew this was Voyage 31. I knew the number. I've never known a Voyage number in 11 years of sailing. They're on the paperwork, on the departure board, on the intercom announcements. I've heard them hundreds of times and they have never once stuck. This one stuck. I don't know when I started paying attention to it. I just know that I do. I looked at the 4 empty seats across the table from me, the bolted down chairs, the scratched surface, the hum, the cold drip, and for the first time in 10 years the empty room felt like it was waiting for something. The afternoon had that specific emptiness to it that only a docked ship gets. No vibration through the floor, no low diesel hum working up through the soles of your feet. The PA had been quiet for 2 hours. I'd eaten half a tin of tomato soup and was tearing bread into it the way I'd done since I was a kid. And the only sounds were my spoon against the bowl and the occasional creak of the hull settling. I liked it actually, the docked quiet. Most crew went ashore when they had the chance, into whatever port city was outside, bars and sunlight and movement. I'd done that for the first few years. Now I mostly stayed. The ship felt like itself when it was empty. The coffee machine had been broken since Gibraltar. It heated the water to somewhere around lukewarm, and that was the best it could do. I'd made do with it anyway, the way you make do with things on a long contract. The cup sat at my elbow. I wasn't really drinking it. I was aware of the silence changing before I could have said how. Not louder, not deeper. Just wrong in some way I couldn't name. The kind of quiet that makes you conscious of your own chewing, your own breathing, the sound of your own teeth. I looked up from my bowl. She was sitting directly across from me. I hadn't heard the door. I hadn't heard footsteps. She was simply there. The way an object is there when you turn around and it was always behind you, present in a way that carries no memory of arriving, old. Late 70s at least, maybe older, the kind of age where the numbers stop mattering much. White hair pinned up in a style I associated with photographs, my grandmother's photographs, the ones from before she was my grandmother. A high-collared blouse, pale, almost cream. A cardigan that looked hand-knitted, dark blue, the stitching uneven at the cuffs. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, very still. She was looking at me with an expression of mild, patient interest, not smiling, not anything really. Like someone sitting in a waiting room who has been there long enough to stop noticing time. My first thought was entirely practical. Passenger. Elderly guest wandered below decks, probably looking for a toilet or a lift and took a wrong turn. It happened. Not often, but it happened, especially with older passengers, occasionally with the ones who were confused in ways nobody mentioned at embarkation. I wasn't alarmed. I was mildly annoyed at myself for not having heard the door open. I set my spoon down. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Are you lost?" She didn't answer the second question. She looked at my coffee cup, not at me, at the cup and then back up. "I wouldn't mind a cup of that," she said, "if there's enough." Her voice was clear. More than clear, precise, each word placed carefully. The accent was something I couldn't locate exactly. Not foreign, old. The vowels of a different era, rounded and unhurried, the way people spoke in old newsreel footage. I stood up. There was enough water in the machine for another cup, barely. I turned my back to her and went to it, found a sachet in the tin beside the machine, dropped it in. The machine made its usual defeated sound. The water that came out was barely warm, 45 seconds, maybe less. I turned back to the table. The chair was pushed in, neat. Square to the table edge, the way chairs get pushed in when nobody is sitting in them. I stood holding 2 cups of bad coffee and looked at the empty table and at the chair and at the space where she had been. I didn't move for a moment. I set both cups down and went out into the corridor, empty. The fluorescent strip at the far end flickered once and held. I went left toward the stairwell. Nothing, no footsteps, no movement. The sound of my own shoes on the floor and nothing else. I went right toward the storage room, tried the handle. It swung open onto mops and industrial cleaning fluid and darkness. Nobody. I went back to the mess and stood in the doorway. The table, the 2 cups, the pushed-in chair. I sat down. I drank my coffee. When it was gone, I pulled the second cup toward me and drank that too, slowly, staring at the chair across the table. It was an ordinary chair, bolted to the floor like all the others. The vinyl seat cracked along one edge, a scuff on the leg where something had caught it. I told myself there was an explanation and that I'd find it when I thought about it clearly enough. I didn't go looking for one. I sat in the room for another 20 minutes. The silence stayed the wrong kind. Eventually, I made myself stand up, made myself pick up the bowl and the bread plate and carry them to the sink. I washed my bowl. I washed the bread plate. Then I picked up both cups and carried them to the sink, washed them both out of some instinct I couldn't explain, and set them side by side on the drying rack. The ship had been back at sea for 2 days and I hadn't said a word to anyone. What was there to say? I'd been tired, the mess had been quiet, and for a few seconds I'd nodded off and dreamed something strange. That was the version I'd been running. It held up fine in daylight, less fine at 3 in the morning, but I was working on it. I had a break at 10:30 and cut through the Lido deck on my way to the stern. It was the long route, but the weather was good. Sun on the water, a light chop, the kind of morning that made the ship feel like an advertisement for itself. Passengers were spread across the deck chairs in clusters, paperbacks tented on their chests, drinks sweating on the little side tables. Someone's kids were shrieking at the pool. The whole scene had that loose, overlit quality of a holiday, going exactly as planned. I saw her before I'd taken 20 steps. She was seated maybe 30 feet from me, angled toward the sun like the others. Same high collar, same dark cardigan buttoned to the throat. The passengers around her were in shorts and sandals and sunglasses, and she was dressed like someone attending a formal occasion in 1953, and she was completely at ease. The woman in the next chair said something to her, leaned over, gestured out toward the water, and the old woman turned her head and responded. I could see her lips moving. She was having a conversation. She was just sitting there, in a deck chair, talking to a stranger. In the middle of a Tuesday morning, I stopped walking. I stood there and watched her for a full minute. She didn't look at me. The light was doing something on her that I couldn't quite name. Not wrong exactly, but off in the way a photograph is off when the contrast is set slightly too high, when everything is a fraction too defined. I noticed it, and immediately didn't trust myself for noticing it. That was the problem. Every time I tried to look at her directly and just see a person, some other part of my brain started in with observations I didn't want. Marcus was at the rail 10 feet to my left. He did this on breaks, had his binoculars out, scanning the water. He watched for dolphins, other ships, anything that moved. I'd seen him do it 100 times. "Let me borrow those," I said. He handed them over without looking up from the water. I raised them to my eyes and found the deck chairs and adjusted the focus until she came sharp. She was sharper than I was ready for. The same folded hands, the same hair pinned up in that old style, a few white strands loose against her neck, the same expression, patient, mild, entirely undisturbed by the sun and the noise and the 200 people around her. Through the lenses, I could see the texture of the cardigan, the slight movement in her chest as she breathed. She looked real. She looked completely real and completely wrong at the same time, and I couldn't hold both of those things at once. I lowered the binoculars. "The woman in the deck chair," I said. "Third row, end of the row. The one in the cardigan." Marcus looked up. "Take a look at her." I handed them over. He raised them, swung them in the direction I'd gestured, and found her. I know when he found her because he went still. Not the stillness of someone concentrating, the stillness of someone who has stopped breathing. He stood like that for maybe 5 seconds. Then he lowered the binoculars. His face had changed. The color had left it the way color leaves a face when the body is deciding whether to be sick. He held the binoculars out to me without turning his head, without looking at me at all, his eyes fixed somewhere on the middle distance. "I need to get back," he said. "What did you see?" "Nothing." He was already moving. I didn't see anything. He walked toward the deck door at a pace that was almost but not quite a run. The door swung open, swung shut behind him, and he was gone. I raised the binoculars again. She was still there. Still in the deck chair, same posture, hands still folded in her lap. But she wasn't looking at the water, and she wasn't looking at the woman in the next chair. She was looking directly at me. Directly at the binoculars, at the lenses, at my eyes behind them, with that same mild and patient expression, like she had been waiting for me to look back, like she had all the time in the world. I lowered the binoculars. With my naked eyes, she was turned back toward the sun. Just an old woman in a deck chair, face tilted up perfectly still. I stood at the rail with the binoculars hanging from my hand, watching the back of Marcus's head disappear through the deck door, and did not move for a long time. The cigarette was already in my mouth before I made it through the stern door. I needed the routine. That was all I was thinking. The familiar weight of the lighter in my palm, the click, the pull, something to put my hands around. I'd spent the last 4 hours going through my checks on autopilot, doing the job the way you do a job when your head is somewhere else entirely, and I'd knocked on Marcus's door twice and got nothing both times. So at 10 I went to the stern. The wake lights were on, cutting pale lines into the black water behind us. The ocean out there was enormous and dark and made no sound you could separate from the engine hum. I came through the door and stopped. She was at the rail, 15 feet maybe, her back to me, facing the sea. White hair pinned up, the heavy dark dress perfectly still. Just standing there the way she'd stood in the staff mess, the way she'd stood in the deck chair, as if stillness was her natural state and movement was the exception. I did not leave. I don't know why. I stood in the doorway for a long moment and thought about going back inside, and then I didn't. I lit the cigarette instead. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I watched her. The wake lights made the water behind the ship glow faintly, and she was a dark shape against it, and she did not move. Then she began to turn. It was slow, unhurried. The way you turn when someone says your name from across a room, and you're not in a rush to answer it. She came around by degrees until she was facing me, and what hit me then was not shock. I'd been half expecting it, I think. Some part of me had been expecting it since I walked through that door. It was something else. Recognition. the confirmation of something I'd already known. She looked at me the way she'd looked through the binoculars, mild and patient and completely without surprise, as if I was the one who'd arrived somewhere she'd been waiting, and the wait had not been inconvenient. Then she started walking toward me, calm, even pace, not hurrying. And here's the thing I kept coming back to, the thing I still can't explain properly. It wasn't that she was walking toward me. That's not quite right. It was that she was walking in a direction, and I was standing in it. Like the direction existed before I was there, and would exist after I moved. Like I was a post she happened to be passing. The distinction felt important. I couldn't have told you why. I backed up 2 steps. Then I turned and went through the door and back into the crew corridor. I want to be clear about that. I walked, quickly, but I walked. I got inside and let the door close behind me and stood in the corridor with the cigarette still burning in my hand, and I stood there until my breathing was normal. Then, I went to find Danny. He was in the crew bar, which was low-lit and half-empty. At that hour, 2 engineers at the far end with a card game going, nobody close. Danny was on a stool at the bar with a pint, and he looked up when I came in and said something about the match, and I sat down beside him and waited until the engineers laughed at something and weren't paying attention. Then I told him all of it. I told it the way I'd tell him about a fault in the ventilation system. Just the facts in order. The staff mess and the drink I poured that she never touched. Marcus with the binoculars and his face afterward. The deck chair. And then tonight. The stern rail, the turn, the walk toward me, the thing about the direction. I didn't embellish. I didn't use words like terrifying. I just told him what I'd seen. Danny listened. He had his pint in both hands and he looked at the bar while I talked, and he didn't interrupt, which I appreciated. When I finished, there was a pause. "Mate," he said. He said it the way you say something when you've already decided what comes after it. "You've been on contract too long. You need shore leave." He wasn't being unkind. That was the thing. He flagged down the bartender and bought me a beer, and then he started talking about the match on Saturday, some result he'd caught on his phone, some striker he thought was overpaid. I drank the beer. I didn't say anything more about the woman. There was nothing more to say, not to Danny, not tonight, and I knew that now. I stayed until midnight. Then I went to my cabin and got into my bunk and lay there in the dark. The bunk above me was empty. My cabin mate was on a different rotation. I stared at the metal slats and listened to the engine noise come up through the hull and thought about the fact that she was not walking toward me. She was walking in a direction, and I could not stop thinking about where that direction ends. 12:40 in the morning and I was still on my back staring at the ceiling. The bunk above me was empty. My cabin mate was on the late rotation, wouldn't be back until 3. The cabin was dark except for the strip of light under the door, and I'd been watching that strip for a long time, listening to the hum of the engines 2 decks below, listening to the ship breathe. I kept seeing her walk, where that direction ends. I was still thinking it when the PA system activated. The 2-tone chime came first. 2 notes, low then high, the same chime the ship uses before every announcement. Before lifeboat drills and port arrival notices and the captain's noon address. I knew that chime the way I knew my own breathing, but something about it landing at 12:40 in the morning made my chest go tight before the voice even started. Attention, a man's voice. Calm, unhurried. The same quality I'd noticed in her voice in the mess. Not old like a person gets old, but old like something that has been waiting in a room for a very long time. All passengers of Voyage 31, please proceed immediately to your assigned lifeboat stations. This is not a drill. All passengers of Voyage 31, please proceed to your assigned lifeboat stations. Then silence. Then the same announcement again, word for word, the same flat calm, the same pause before lifeboat stations. Then nothing. I sat up. The ship's PA operator had a voice I'd been hearing every day for 4 months. A younger man, South African accent, slightly nasal. This was not him. This was not anyone I'd heard before, and I'd have noticed, because I'd been paying attention to voices since the mess. I sat on the edge of the bunk with my feet on the floor. The voyage number. The ship's current voyage was Voyage 31. I'd seen it on the paperwork, on the corridor signage, on the daily bulletin. But the phrasing was wrong. All passengers of Voyage 31 wasn't how you ran a lifeboat drill. You didn't name the voyage number. You said all passengers, all guests, muster stations, your attention please. You didn't name it like you were calling specific people by a category they belonged to. No drill was scheduled. I knew the drill schedule. Everyone on crew knew the drill schedule. I pulled on my jeans, my sweatshirt, my shoes, didn't think about it much. Just moved. The crew corridor was empty. A few cabin doors, all closed, no light underneath them. Whatever the announcement had been, either no one else had heard it or no one else was treating it as a reason to get up. I walked toward the forward stairwell, went up 2 decks to the main passenger level, pushed through the fire door. I heard them before I saw them, not footsteps. That's not the right word for it. It was the sound of a crowd moving in the same direction without talking. A collective shuffle, fabric and weight, and the small sounds of bodies in motion. The sound a group of people make when they've agreed on where they're going and don't need to discuss it anymore. I came around the corner into the main passenger corridor and stopped. There were maybe 25 of them, maybe 30, moving in a single column toward the boat deck stairs at the far end of the corridor, and they were wearing life jackets. Not the inflatable kind. Not the slim, modern kind that the ship's safety briefing video showed you how to pull over your head. These were the cork block type, orange, rectangular. The kind I had only ever seen in old photographs, in maritime museum displays, in black and white footage from the middle of the last century. Thick orange blocks strapped across the chest with white canvas ties. The kind that were phased out before I was born. Beneath the life jackets, men in dark suits, women in heavy dresses. There were children, in clothing that belonged in a school photograph from the 1950s. The fabric was dark. The cuts were wrong for anything in this century. At the front of the column, leading them, was the woman. She wasn't looking back. Her white hair was pinned up, the same way it had been every time I'd seen her, and she was walking with the same calm and purposeful stride I'd watched at the stern rail. Not slow, not fast. The pace of someone who knows exactly where they're going and has no doubt about getting there. I pressed myself against the corridor wall. They passed within 4 feet of me. I could see their faces. I looked at them because I couldn't not look. Men and women and children moving in silence, not speaking, not looking at me, not looking at anything in particular, just facing forward, facing the stairs, going where they were supposed to go. Their expressions were not frightened. They were not blank either. They looked like people who had made peace with something. Settled. The way a face looks when the decision is already behind it. None of them saw me. Or if they did, they didn't care. The column moved past me and I watched the woman's back and I thought, I didn't put words to it then, but I felt it land, that this had happened before. Not that I'd seen it before. That she had done this before, that all of them had. That this corridor, this ship, had held this procession many times and would hold it again, and none of it had anything to do with me. standing here with my back against the wall at 12:40 in the morning. The last of them reached the stairwell. I pushed off the wall and tried to follow. My legs didn't work, not seized up, not cramping. They just wouldn't carry me forward. I took a step and it was like walking into something I couldn't see. A current, a pressure, a wall made of nothing I could point to. I tried again, same result. I stood there in the middle of the corridor with every intention of moving and nothing happening, and I watched the last few figures in the column disappear up the stairs one by one. Then it hit me, not from any direction I could name, just a pressure, sudden and total, like the air itself had decided to be something heavier. My knees went, and I went with them, and the floor came up fast, and the last thing I saw before it did was the hem of her dark skirt disappearing around the top of the stairwell. The ceiling came first, pale, curved, vibrating faintly with the engine hum that lived in every surface of the ship. Then Marcus's face close, watching me with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided not to panic. "You fainted," he said. "You were out for maybe 2 minutes. Can you sit up?" I sat up. The corridor tilted once and settled. My palms were flat on the carpet and the carpet was real and the corridor was empty. No column, no dark skirts, no life jackets of any kind. Just the long fluorescent run of it and the stairwell door at the far end, dark and closed and quiet. Marcus was crouched beside me, the same color he'd been that afternoon on the Lido deck, that particular shade of carefully managed pale, the face of a man holding himself together by concentrating on small practical tasks. Get him sitting. Check his eyes. Don't think about anything else. I got to my feet without taking his hand. My head swam and then didn't. "What are you doing on the passenger deck?" I asked. "It's 1:30 in the morning." He stood up slowly, didn't answer right away. He looked at the stairwell door the same way I had, then back at me. "I heard the announcement," he said. I watched him. "What did you see through the binoculars this afternoon?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. He put one hand against the corridor wall, not leaning on it exactly, just touching it, like he needed to feel something solid. "I saw her," he said. "I saw all of them. There were dozens of them on the deck." He stopped. "You could only see one." I waited. The ship moved underneath us, that slow, deep roll it does in open water, the kind you stop noticing after a week and then suddenly notice all at once. "I've been on this ship 4 years," he said. "I've seen them before. Not like this, not this many." The fluorescent light buzzed once, faint, then steadied. "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked at me then, not defensive, just tired. "Because what would I say?" He spread one hand, a small gesture. "Who would I tell? You report something like this, you're off the ship by the next port. Psychological evaluation. End of contract." He paused. "I've got a daughter starting university in September." He said it quietly. Not as an excuse, just as a fact he'd been carrying. I understood it completely. That was the thing. I understood it the way you understand arithmetic. The ship was my income. The ship was my address. It was the only structure I'd built for myself in 10 years, and it wasn't much of a structure, but it was the one I had. Saying nothing was the rational thing. I'd been saying nothing since the afternoon in the staff mess when she'd been sitting across from me and then wasn't. Every day since then had been a small, careful decision to say nothing. I'd been making the same calculation Marcus had made. I just hadn't had a name for it. "I'm going to report it," I said, "to the safety officer." Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not surprise, not relief, something more like recognition. He nodded once slowly. "All right," he said. He didn't argue, didn't tell me I was wrong. or that it would end my contract, or that I should sleep on it. He just stood up straight and offered me his hand, and I took it this time, and we stood together in the empty corridor with the dark stairwell at one end, and nothing at all moving anywhere. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're right." He stopped. I just couldn't do it myself. He held my eyes for another second, then dropped them. He turned and walked back the way he'd come, his footsteps quiet on the carpet, and then he was gone around the corner and I was alone. The corridor stretched out in front of me. I stood there. I thought about the daughter starting university in September. I thought about the way Marcus had said it. Not as an excuse, just as a fact. The way you state the thing that makes everything else make sense. He had someone depending on him. That was the difference. That was the whole of it. I had the ship. I had the contract. I had a bunk in a crew cabin and a locker with a padlock and a job I knew how to do. None of it depended on me being the kind of person who said nothing. I made myself walk. The safety officer's station was at the end of the crew corridor, one level down. A metal door painted the same gray as everything else down there, with a small placard beside it and a thin strip of light showing underneath. I stood in front of it. My hand came up. I knocked, and the sound of my own knuckles on the metal was the loudest thing I'd heard all night. The door opened before I'd finished knocking the second time. She was already in uniform, full uniform, pressed dark jacket, epaulettes, the works, at 2 in the morning. Officer Reyes. I knew her by sight the way you know most officers on a ship this size. Face, rank, general direction of authority. We'd never exchanged more than a nod in a corridor. She was compact, mid-50s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of face that had probably looked 45 for the last decade, and would keep looking 45 for the next one. She looked at me, just looked for a moment, taking in whatever I looked like standing there at this hour. Then she stepped back and let me in. No, why are you here? No, what do you want? She just moved aside and I walked past her into the office. It was small, smaller than I'd expected. A desk, a chair, a narrow strip of floor, and then the monitor bank taking up most of the far wall. 8 screens, maybe 9, each one showing a different feed in blue-white light. Corridors, deck sections, the atrium, the engine room access. The whole ship laid out in silent tiles, and every one of them empty. She closed the door behind me. I told her everything. I didn't dress it up and I didn't leave anything out. The PA announcement, the one no one on the night crew seemed to have heard. The corridor, the column of them walking single file in those old cork block life jackets, the kind you don't see anymore, moving without sound. The woman at the front. I told her what the woman looked like. The white hair, the dark dress, the way she moved like she had somewhere specific to be and had always been going there. I told her about the force at the stairwell, the one that wasn't a wind or a pressure change, the one that stopped me the way a wall stops you. And then I told her about waking up on the floor with Marcus crouched over me. I told it the same way I'd told it before. Straight through, no adjectives. Rice didn't interrupt. She stood with her arms loose at her sides and listened, and her face didn't do much of anything. When I finished, there was a short silence. "Which corridor?" she said. I told her. She turned to the monitor bank and sat down in front of it. Her hands moved over the keyboard with the ease of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, pulling up a specific feed, rewinding a timestamp. The screen in the top left corner shifted. Corridor feed. The overhead angle, the long perspective of the hallway, the numbered cabin doors running away into the distance. She rewound to 12:40 a.m. The corridor was empty. I stood behind her and watched the timestamp tick forward. 12:40, 12:45, 12:50. The corridor sat there, clean and still and utterly empty, the overhead fluorescents throwing the same flat light they always threw, and nothing moved in it. Nothing. At 1:09, I watched myself appear on the floor. Just appear, mid-frame, already down. And 2 minutes after that, Marcus materialized beside me, crouching, shaking my shoulder. The corridor had been empty, and then I was on the floor of it, and there was no version of events in between. I didn't say anything. Reyes didn't say you imagined it. She didn't say there's nothing there. There's your answer. Get some sleep, she said. That's the corridor feed, in the same flat voice she might have used to say that's the starboard side or that's deck 7. Just information. She was already pulling up a second feed, boat deck exterior. Lifeboat station 4, she rewound to 12:55 a.m. The deck was empty. Dark, the running lights doing their usual nothing, the lifeboats hanging in their davits where they always hung. 12:55. 12:56. At 12:57, the davit release handle on Station 4 began to move. It was a heavy steel lever. I'd handled them during drills. Solid, stiff, the kind of mechanism that requires a real deliberate pull to operate. It didn't rattle or slip. It moved the way a handle moves when a hand grips it and pulls, slowly. With weight behind it, it traveled the full arc to the release position and held there. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, then it snapped back. Nobody on the deck. No shadow, no figure, no disturbance in the air around it. The deck was empty, and the handle moved anyway, and then it stopped. Rice rewound it. We watched it again. The empty deck, the handle moving, the hold, the snap. She rewound it a third time without speaking. I watched the handle move and I thought about the woman's hand on it. The small pale hand, the dark sleeve of the dress, the unhurried certainty of it. Because that's what I would have seen if I'd been able to follow them up the stairs. If the stairwell had let me through, that's exactly what I would have been watching. The footage looped. The handle moved. The handle snapped back. Rise reached for the phone on her desk. She didn't look up a number. She just dialed, from memory without hesitating, and waited. The line connected. I heard the faint crackle of it. "Captain," she said. "It's Reyes. I need you to come to my station." A pause. "Yes, now. I'll explain when you get here." She set the phone down. She didn't look at me. She was looking at the monitor. The boat deck feed still running on its loop. The empty deck, the handle moving, the snap back to position. Her face was the same as it had been since she'd opened the door. Not surprised, not skeptical, not even particularly troubled, just focused. In the way someone gets focused when a protocol kicks in, and they know exactly what the next step is. That was the thing that settled into me, standing there in the blue-white light of her office. Not the footage, not the handle. The fact that she'd dialed from memory. The fact that she hadn't asked me if I was sure, hadn't suggested I get some rest, hadn't done any of the things a person does when they think you're wrong. She had a number for this. She knew it by heart. Officer Reyes's phone sits on the desk between them. The call ended, and on the monitor above it, the davit handle moves again in silence, the footage looping, and neither of them says a word. Officer Reyes opened the door and said it without looking at me. "You'll be contacted about next steps. For now, go get some rest." That was it. 40 minutes on a corridor bench. The captain's voice a low murmur through the closed door the whole time, and then 4 words and a dismissal. I stood up. My back ached from the bench. I walked. The staff mess at 4 in the morning is nobody's favorite place. The fluorescent lights run a half second behind themselves somehow. They're on, they're bright, but there's something in the hum that makes everything look like a copy of itself. The coffee machine has been broken for 6 weeks. You can still get something hot and brown out of it if you hold the button down and wait. And whatever comes out tastes like coffee, the way a photograph tastes like food. I made myself a cup anyway. I sat down, same table, same chair. The seat across from me was empty. I sat there and looked at it for a while. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me actually. I'd been waiting to be afraid again, braced for it the way you brace for a wave you can see coming. But it didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and harder to name. Not peace, not anything so clean as that. More like the feeling you get when you've been arguing with yourself about something for a long time, and you finally just stop. The argument's still there, you just quit having it. Something happened on this ship, on a voyage that shared the same number as ours, 31. Something happened to a group of people, and the last thing they did is still happening. That's the only way I can put it. They were going to the lifeboats. They were wearing the old-style jackets. They were doing what you do when a ship is going down. And whatever came after that, whatever ended it, they haven't gotten there yet. They're still in the last minutes. They may always be in the last minutes. I drank the bad coffee. I looked at the empty chair. I didn't know what year it was when it happened, what route, what the disaster was. I still don't. I looked it up once, later, and found enough to know I was right about the number, and then I stopped looking. The investigation moved the way investigations on ships move, which is slowly and mostly out of sight. Nobody pulled me off my shifts. Nobody sat me down and told me I was crazy or that I wasn't. I finished my rotations, ate my meals, slept when I could sleep. I didn't see her again. The old woman, the one with the white hair and the colorless eyes and that dress that belonged to some other decade. I don't know if she's gone. I don't know if gone is even the right category. Maybe whatever she needed to do was done. The handle moved. The footage ran. Someone official saw it and picked up a phone. Maybe that was enough. Some kind of record made. Some acknowledgement that they're still there, still trying. I've thought about that a lot. I'm still thinking about it. Marcus found me on deck one afternoon. 3 days later, the sea was very blue. That particular blue you only get in open water when the sky is clear and there's nothing between you and the horizon. He came and stood next to me at the rail, and neither of us said much for a while. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded. He looked out at the water. Then he said, "I'm not renewing my contract either." I looked at him. He didn't look back, just kept his eyes on the sea, his hands on the rail. "When'd you decide?" "Few days ago." We stood there a while longer. The wake spread out behind us in a long, white V, dissolving slowly into all that blue. I didn't ask him what he'd seen through the binoculars that afternoon. He didn't ask me what had happened in the mess, or at the lifeboats, or in the corridor outside Reyes's office. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood between two people. So, here's what I believe. I believe the ship is haunted. Not as a metaphor, not as a way of talking about old paint and creaking bulkheads, and the weight of a vessel that's been at sea for 30 years. I mean it the way you mean something when you've seen it with your own eyes, and felt it in your chest at 3 in the morning, and had it confirmed on a monitor by a woman who then picked up the phone without looking at you. I believe the passengers of Voyage 31 are still aboard, still moving through whatever those last minutes were, still making their way toward the boats. I don't know why I could see them when other people couldn't, or why she came and sat across from me in the staff mess. The one room on this ship that belongs to crew, that passengers never enter, and looked at me with those still patient eyes. I've stopped looking for an answer to that. Whatever it wasn't for me to understand. It was just for me to see. I'm finishing this contract. I've already told the company I won't be renewing. After 10 years, 10 years of bunks and rotations and watching ports slide by from the wrong side of the glass. I'm going to find out what it feels like to have an address, a real one. Somewhere you can leave a coat on a hook by the door and know it'll be there when you come back. I made that decision in the staff mess at 4 in the morning with a cup of bad coffee and an empty chair across from me. It didn't feel like running. It felt like something finally becoming clear. The last image I have from that night is the monitor, the footage looping, the davit handle on Lifeboat Station 4 moving slowly. Not fast, not violently, just the careful, deliberate motion of a hand that knows what it's doing. And then holding, and then snapping back. Over and over, Reyes had turned the monitor toward me, and we'd both watched it, and neither of us had said a word. That's what I keep coming back to, the care of it. Whatever is still aboard this ship, whatever is still trying to leave, they're not panicking. They're just doing what they did. They're pulling the handle. They're going through the steps. They've been going through the steps for a very long time. I stubbed the cigarette out on the stern rail. The wake spreads behind us, wide and white, dissolving into all that open blue. I hope they make it.